Hey guys, my name is Stefan Viljoen and welcome to a new episode of In Studio with Stefan Viljoen. This time round I'm going to be showing you how I produced my new track, which is a vocal trance single with Jade Mc Donald, Divinity. This tutorial is going to be in two videos. It's going to be one video showing the actual backtrack and the track itself, how it was produced, and then we'll cover vocals in a separate video which will be posted directly after this one. It's just because Facebook has a limit of 20 minutes per video and we want to go quite in depth with vocals. So guys, if you haven't heard the single yet, it is out now on Above All Records, and just to give an idea, this is what the completed track sounds like. So that's the complete track, and it also has an Alex Shaw and a 138 BPM driving analog remix if you do go buy the EP. So let's get into the track. The main backtrack was produced in Ableton Live, and I'm going to show you all the various separate tracks, and then we'll go a bit more in depth into each of them. So first of all, I've got 3 dummy sidechain tracks, which you can see here. They're muted, you can't hear them, they're just there to trigger sidechain, and I use 2 or 3 tracks because there are some parts in the track where I only want certain of the elements to be sidechained, and that's just how I like doing it. Then we've got the drums. Drums sound like this. So if we just break it down a bit, I've got a top kick. I got a bottom kick, and then I bust them together. If we have a bit of a look at what's in the actual chain, I just use an impulse to load up my samples. You'll see the top kick is quite short. You'll see over here the decay, and you'll see the kind of low end of the kick has got a much longer tail. The top kick, I remove all the low end because I don't want it to clash with the low end that I'm using for my sub kick. I've got a compressor just to give a bit of attack and just to make it a bit more aggressive. Very important, guys, take a look at my volume right at the start of the signal chain. It's down by 20 dBs, because if you go look at the previous tutorials on my website, www.stefanviljoen.com, you'll see that I'll explain the principle of gain structure and not having any clipping within the signal chain in order to give yourself a good mixdown and a good master. So you'll see if you look at the signal flow, I've got loads of headroom. Here I've just got a spectrum which I used to tune the kick and get in the right key. On the sub kick, I've also just got a compressor and I've got an EQ. You can see I've done a cut to 40. I've done a little bit of a boost here at about 100 Hertz. And then I cut out some mids. And then you'll see on the actual bus of the kick, once again, just to clean it up, I've completely shelved off everything off the 40 Hertz. A little bit more compression, but extremely light compression, and I'm running it through a maximizer. And I just like using this limiter just to limit it, and also to, in some scenarios, I'll use it to give it a little bit of attack. So that's the kick. Next up, we got the snares. I'm running 2 of them, one left, one right, each of them panned quite hard. And so if we look at the snare, I'm just using a single dry snare, which you can see here. Once again, look at the volume, headroom. On my EQ, I've cut off all the low end as it's not necessary. Want to clean it up, make sure there's nothing interfering with the low end of the mix. I use quite a lot of saturation. You'll see I've got a lot of overdrive. I'm using utility to put into mono, and the reason for that is just because I'm doing the hard left, hard right panning, so I want to kind of just have it mono so we have nothing sitting in the center of the mix. And then I'm using some compression to tame this. This snare was a little bit harsh on the ears, so this just tames it a bit. And that's it. Next up, I've got a verb clap, which is the same snare that I've now gone and laid with a couple of others, and I just, in this part of the track here, you'll hear I use it. So you'll see there's a couple of these, and they're all, you can see with the layering, they're all put off the grid just to give it that like proper layered feel. You'll see I've got EQ once again cutting some low end, but I'm cutting less because there isn't really a kick when this hits. Compressor, you'll see my attack all the way down just to tame it a bit, and then a huge reverb. You'll see quite a long decay time, and just gives it that big spacious effect. And then you'll see I've got another compressor here, and the reason for this is to bring out the volume of the tail of this reverb. And then I've got a sidechain compressor to give it that pumping sound. Once again, always gain structure is key. Okay, next up we're going to have a look at hi-hats. You'll see I've got this channel here. So I've got a couple of hi-hats. You'll see I take the decay back to keep it nice and clean, and I've panned some right and some of them are sitting left just to kind of give it a bit of space and get it to sit wide in the mix. And then my main open hat is this one here. This I've bussed through a separate audio channel. I'm running it through some overdrive. You can see my EQ here. I'm cutting off almost all of the noise. I just want this. I'm using a compressor to tame it a bit. And then this delay here, what I'm doing is I'm only delaying the right channel by 70 milliseconds. And what this does is it makes this hi-hat sit very wide in the mix. You can hear the difference. And that's purely done just for mixing purposes, just to get it to sit in the background of the mix. We put them together. On the other hi-hats, I'm using this R compressor from Waves, and the reason why I'm using this is it's got this like built-in saturation. You can see you can push the gain up, and you can have it go yellow before it goes into red, and it just gives it like a really nice warm sound. Also, I love the way this compressor with hi-hats just makes the attack sit out a bit more. Next up, we've got a ride, just a standard ride sample. I've pushed the start all the way forward because this actually falls on a kick and I don't want it to interfere with the click of my kick. And I brought the decay back quite a bit to keep it nice and neat, and I've cut off the low end. And I've got a crash, which is just a standard sample. As you can see, I've taken the gain down to give me some headroom, and it's just got a reverb on it. Finally, I've got an audio track with some extra shakers. Once again, you can see my EQ cleaning up the mix, taking out all the low end, compressor and some sidechain, and a final crash for good measure. So guys, that's the drums. What I do with that is I've got a compressor giving some light compression. You'll see my ratio is quite low. You'll see I've got some attack, and just kind of glues it all together. And then I'm also sending this to a parallel compressor on a return track C. There you can see it's actually off at the moment. I've just switched it off for the purpose of this tutorial, as I want to demonstrate the difference it makes a little bit later. And next up, we're going to look at bass. Okay, so for the bass line, I'm running a sub bass. In the break, I'm running it with a separate sign. This is just to control, it's processed a bit differently. And then I've also got this pad bass, which runs with the pads in the break. And then finally on this channel, or in this group, that's used for the drops. So what I've done with these is just to clean them up on the bus, cutting off everything below 40 Hertz. And you'll see here I'm putting out a bit of mud at 500. I've got some light compression, some bus sidechain compression, and then on each of these channels you can see I'm just EQing them to only take the frequencies I'd like. So for the sub bass, you can see I'm only taking the lower frequencies. I'm also running it through Waves R bass, and I'm making sure that the sub bass is mono with another big, I use 2 sidechain compressors to get it to kind of duct as hard as I like it to. And I've kind of just followed that same procedure on all of these channels. As you can see, the main thing is just having EQ and just kind of really removing all the frequencies you don't need and just keeping the ones you want. Also on these darker pad sounds, I use a bit of overdrive and a bit of bud crusher. Then we've got this fast rolling bass, which you can hear. So this is a standard sound, from Silent. You can see nothing really fancy, but I'm running it through a compressor, some EQ, cutting off the low end because we don't need any low end here because we're already getting it from the previous sub bass channels that I've shown you, and some sidechain. And then on the bus, just more EQ, SSL compressor, just to get it a bit smoother because it was kind of popping out a bit, and more sidechain compression. And then these 2 auto filters are used for the arrangement, just for kind of fading it in and out. And then we've got these bass stabs. So you'll hear this is also, once again, just kind of a basic sound from Silent. I'm running it through an EQ, cutting off the low end, overdrive, bud crusher, more EQ. One of my favorite plugins, Waves R bass, and filter, compressor, and sidechain compression. Over here, you'll see I've recorded that sound and I've reversed it. So when you put these together, so exact same sound, just a single stab, and then I just reversed it and brought it in as audio. Similar processing. I'm using utility to make it a bit wider in the mix, equalizer, R bass, and then my standard compression and sidechain compression. And then finally I've got the sub bass stab. So similar sound, cutting off quite a bit of low end. You guys must remember, although this is a bass sound, we're getting our low end from the sub channels that I showed you previously, so we don't need it in these sounds, otherwise it just creates mud. So remove all the low end, bit of compression. I've got this auto filter here. You can see it just cuts off that high end. And sidechain. So when we put the 3 of these together, you'll see we get the complete bass line. That together with the drums. And then just to mention that I do also use parallel processing for my bass. You can hear here you can see I've got a special effects track with some EQ, R bass, more EQ, putting it in mono, compression, and sidechain compression, and I use this as a separate parallel bass compression and bass processing chain, just to kind of really bring out the warmth in that bass. Okay guys, next up we're going to be looking at the synths. First things first, we've got these driving synths. So this is what the MIDI looks like, and this is the MIDI for the longer gated sounds. And these are the sounds themselves. It's just various sounds from Silent. I layer them. I have some sitting wide, some sitting more centered in the mix, some dry, some wet. So the layers look like this. That's my right layer, my left layer. You can see some EQ cutting off a lot of low end because it's going to be playing with the bass and the kick, so you don't want it to create mud. And some compression. This one's not being used. So yeah, basically you've got 4 sounds all added together. You can see they're all sitting very wide in the mix, panned left and right. And what this does is it gives enough space for the kick and the bass and everything to cut through, so that you don't get any mud. And then we've basically got the same sounds, just with longer notes. And then I've bust them together with some hard sidechain. And that together creates the main synths. Just keep in mind guys, when it comes to processing, you'll notice, have a look there, and have a look at my gain over there. I've always got enough headroom, always, as far back to the source as you can go. Take down your gain, take down your volume, and then I'll just show you the bus processing. EQ, cutting off the low end, got a glue compressor and sidechain, and together with them all bust together. Next up, we'll look at the pads. Most of these pads are in audio, as I exported them using sounds from Logic. I didn't like the pad sounds I had in Silent, so I used some of the standard Logic sounds. So I just went into Logic, brought in the chords, bounced this out as audio, and then brought it back into Ableton. You can hear the various channels. You can see a lot of headroom, look how low the volume is, and you can see quite basic processing, just EQ. Each of these pads is kind of EQ'd only to do a specific part of the frequency range. So you can see this is more mids. Some more high end. The choir. And some strings. What I've done here is I just took the tails of these sounds and I reversed it to create this sound here. Then I bust all of those together, more EQ, a glue compressor to gel it all together, and some sidechain compression. And then all of the pads together sound like this. Next up, we've got the piano and the plucks. So if you look at the piano, I'm using a standard grand piano from Ableton. I'm using the piano MIDI plugin. These are all standard effects built into the grand piano's effects chain. And then what I've done is I've added this Apex Vintage Warmer from Waves. I'm lazy when it comes to automation, which is why I have so many channels for my piano. So I just tune each of these different, and then I don't need to automate them. But yeah, nothing really too hectic. Just some basic chords and MIDI. A lot of warmth and reverb. Next up, we have these plucks. These are sounds from Massive that I've just taken. I've layered two of them together. The MIDI looks like this. We got some EQ cutting off the low end, and we got some compression. The two different layers sound like this. And this one has some saturation on it. And then I just bust them together. A little bit more EQ, a auto filter which is used for the arrangement, and a glue compressor with sidechain. Although the sidechain isn't working now in the break, it only kicks in when the whole track is playing. And then finally, we've just got some noise and sweeps and effects to gel it all together. So I use some white noise from Silent. You can see how I EQ, I cut off all the low end. I use reverb and sidechain compression. And you'll also see I use two oscillators, one panned left, one panned right. So you can see there left and there right. Some more white noise, but this is automated to sweep. You can see there. A crash. The same crash reversed. And then this boom. And this uplifter. So as you guys can see, the track sounds really full and sounds really good, but when you actually just break it down into all the individual tracks, it's not that complicated. It just takes a while to get your mix down right, but as long as you have good gain structuring and you work with all the space you have in the mix, you'll get a good mix. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that and I hope you could learn something. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to my page on Facebook, Stefan Viljoen Music, or email me at info@stefanviljoen.com. I'll be happy to answer them. Also, you can get more info regarding my mixing and mastering services. Stick around for the second video. The second video, I'm going to be showing you how we edited and processed the vocals. I was working with a fantastic vocalist, Jade Mc Donald, and yeah, I'm excited to show you how we did that. Stick around.